Comic book grading's a scam. You're not a real collector. Don't go having a heart attack. It's my reader copy. It likes it rough. Well, this video is going to crap on a lot of old school style collectors. Just kidding. But really, maybe like 10% of them. The YouTube comment section comic book heckler. The gift that keeps on giving. I swear I really do want to make normal videos. This is my second conflict-driven comic drama video in a row. But they do get views, and more importantly, this one is meant to make a point and to help you make a decision. I'm going to touch on third-party comic book grading and maybe help you answer that modern-age old question. Is comic grading a scam? Is it even good for the hobby? And should you do it? First, I do want to ask you guys, if you believe crapping on other parts of the comic book hobby is bullshit, please hit the like button. So this video was inspired by a commenter in a previous video that I did, and judging by their comments, they appear to be anti-grading company, i.e. paying money for people to put a number on your book. I really wish I would have realized this sooner from his comments, but I didn't. I would have never tried to turn him to our dark side ways of putting written work into our comic collecting carbonite. First things first, and on a serious note, old school comic collectors, I genuinely mean no disrespect by this. This is not even an age situation. What I'm referring to is this get off my lawn mentality that's directed towards newer avenues of the comic book collecting hobby. I'm referring to an avatar of what I've created called the OG Jerry. You're not a real collector. You know, the people that make the hobby not fun or even welcoming to new collectors. So sincerely, please, if you are an old collector, this is not a jab at you for your age. I'm sure your collection can run circles around mine. But if you're OG Jerry, let's talk. The spark of inspiration for this topic starts with this video here. In short, in this video, I express my displeasement with some recent CGC 9.8 pre-screen grades that I got back that I felt were very, very harsh. One commenter decides to pick apart every single sentence that I said, throw it back at me like I'm a contradicting asshole, and try to completely discredit the entire third-party comic book grading system. I think it's fair to say that when many of us get back grades that we feel are subpar or that we're not happy with, we're going to say some irrational shit. Hell, I've even said live on an unboxing, if this doesn't hit a certain grade, grading is a sham and I'm done. Guys, I do love this hobby. It's like rooting for your favorite football team. Well, you know what, Betty? It's like this guy.
You rotten bums! You overpaid winners! Break out the champagne! It's in the bag! The fat lady has left the building!
I'm sure we've all been this guy, but how do I really feel in the long run? I've got another 20 Bronze Age horror books I'm cleaning and pressing, about to send back out to CGC. My actions say how I really feel about it. So hit the bell notification on the channel so you can be part of the live horror unboxing that I cannot wait to get to, and it's going to be a blast. So let's start with this first broad question. Should you get a comic book graded? If it makes financial sense for that particular book, or if condition matters to you in your personal collection, third-party grading is important. Now here's the statement that's going to cause the next comment heckler. Watch. If the hobby matters to you, comic book grading is essential. Now that's a pretty heavy statement. That's an extreme claim. So what makes it essential? Number one, essential for the longevity of the hobby. In the early 2000s, the comic book hobby was at an all-time low after the 90s boom. And it actually caused a spike in interest of the older comic book keys. And two vital things happened at this point. One, quality comic book movies started to get made more. And two, CGC, the very first third-party grading service, entered the hobby. And to many of the collectors was a breath of fresh air that the hobby needed at the time. Not to mention, third-party grading follows the natural progression of a hobby in which their collectibles hold large amounts of value for long periods of time, i.e. stamps, coins, cards, things of that nature. Hear the heckler approaching his keyboard now. Are stamps even really valuable anymore? Go put in eBay graded stamps sold, minimum search $1,000 and see what comes up. Certain stamps still sell for a lot of money. Not only has the entrance of third-party grading added an additional layer to the hobby, but it entered it when the hobby needed it the most. Number two, and this is very important, third-party comic book grading is essential to obtain the most accurate grading consensus that there is to be had. Perfect is not what we're striving for here. Most accurate is the more obtainable goal. So a lot of OG Jerrys might just say, well, just use the Overstreet price guide. Why pay CGC? Third-party grading has more than just number grade and market value benefits. One, they do offer way more protection for older, valuable books that need to be preserved. This thing is complete, but it's beat to hell. I'll be damned if I let this sit inside of a bag and board in southern Louisiana. Not only protection, but CGC checks for restoration and authentication. It's not always about this. This right here is a certificate saying that this book is what it says it is. Comment heckler, hold on. Yeah, I know CGC has had its mishaps, acetate gate, but do you know how many counterfeit copies of Cerebus #1 were probably sold before CGC came out? Or TMNT #1? And I guarantee you, many fake copies exchanged hands before a person had the benefit of CGC verification. A lot of money lost. Let's get back to the OG Jerry's and their Overstreet Price Guide. Why the Overstreet Price Guide? The Overstreet Price Guide has been around for decades. It is true to the origins of the hobby. It has the hobby's best interest in mind. It is a trusted source for valuing books amongst many old school collectors. Not the case anymore for value, but they were. Now it's important to note that originally grading revolved around 3 conditions: poor, fine, and near mint. But comic book condition is highly complex. But Overstreet evolved to make it more accurate and served its condition complexity. So what did they do? They ended up jumping to 7, I think it's 7 grades was the next stop. Now in the 7 grade format, you still have infiltration of subjectivity. Remember, when you're grading, ideally, in the picture perfect world, it's supposed to be 100% objective. So what does Overstreet do? Overstreet creates the very first 1 to 10 point grading scale in an attempt to make comic book grading more objective. It was Overstreet's idea and recommendation that the hobby create its own third-party grading service. Well, if that's the case, then why didn't Overstreet create third-party grading? Because Overstreet already controlled the value. And they knew the conflict of interest and what it would look like if one company controlled the value and the say in the condition. It was too much power, so Overstreet did not want to be the official company to grade comics. Smart move. So how does third-party grading make a comic book transaction more secure? Simple. If you're dealing in a transaction, you need somebody involved that has no stake in the game. It keeps the bias out of the seller's grading in the transaction. And number 2, a large company is what's needed to establish a large consensus of grade of comic books throughout the entire world. This is extremely important. CGC is a hub. They're getting books from everywhere, and they have seen hundreds, if not hundreds of thousands of copies amongst all of their experienced collectors and their compiled data. And with all this information, it's the only way for you to form a more accurate consensus of a comic's true grade according to the comic's relativity and availability. Another very important statement. You listen to OG Jerry? No single everyday collector, even with 50 years of experience, will have the quantified data that CGC can train into their graders. Not to mention have on hand for reference. And I do not work for CGC or CBCS or PGX or any third-party grading service. If you want proof of that, go look at some of my thumbnails. But the biggest thing is they're compiling data amongst many 50 plus years experience collectors to form a more accurate consensus. Now I'm going to show you a great example of this. Recently I did a Spider-Man submission. I was determined to find a copy of Secret Wars #8 to get in a CGC 9.8 with the custom symbiote label. This is something that I just wanted for my own personal collection. So for a few days, I scoured eBay looking hard at conditions, and I finally found a copy that was listed very fine. From the photos I found was in pristine condition. But I basically messaged the seller after looking at the photos, and I said, now keep in mind this is somebody who did not appear to be new to selling comic books, but I basically messaged him and I asked him, what in your eyes are you seeing that you say makes this a very fine grade? And I think he actually had the grade listed as an 8.5, but his answer to me was the only thing that was wrong with that comic was that the print on the front page was slightly off center. And in his eyes, he thought that this would grade out as an 8.5. If you've seen your fair share of copies of 80s comic books, especially the Secret Wars run, off-centered, that slightly off-centered printing is extremely common and accounts for probably, 80% of most of the print run of Secret Wars. So I bought this comic with the knowledge of the general consensus. And I had a strong prediction that with the proper clean and press, I would get my 9.8. This is going on. This is going to be on my wall right behind me if it's 9.8. Maybe if it's 9.6, we'll see. But I want that 9.8.
It won't. It has to be a 9.8. There's no 9.6 on that wall behind you.
You ready? Yes! Yes! You, Frank! And that's a 9.8 by Frank. So do we bitch about discrepancies between 9.6 and 9.2 or a 9.0 to a 9.4? Of course, always will. But it's still the best way that can be done if you're somebody who appreciates conditions. Now here's one of the biggest arguments. Now this is one that the commenter said that was basically his reasoning for discrediting all of comic book grading. His statement was, the hopes of getting the right grader when sending your books in completely defeats the purpose of comic book grading and does not deserve its numerical status, or I guess the objective trade of grading that it's supposed to be. So the big question, is comic book grading subjective or is it objective? Ready for this answer? Oh yeah, it's both, baby. OG Jerry's, before you throw your hands up, hit the dislike and bounce on the video. Just wait, just hear me out. And then you can hit the thumbs down and shit on this part of the hobby. Objectivity and subjectivity alternate throughout the comic book grading spectrum, because that is how complex the variations of deficiencies are on a book. You gotta understand something. The grading of a comic book is unlike the grading of any other collectible that came before it. Coins, round, 2 sides. Baseball cards, rectangular, 2 sides. Stamps, square, 2 sides. Comic books have 32 pages, a front and a back cover, multiple levels of shine, of gloss, paper quality, hardware staples, color, variation, printer, and manufacturing defects. You have a larger number of surface areas, larger number of stains, length of creases, and this can happen on any and every of the 32 pages inside of a comic book. That is absurd, but it's awesome. That's the point that a lot of people are missing. What I mean when I'm saying that they're alternating, I mean that there's always a little bit of both objectivity and subjectivity in every comic book grade from 1 to 10 or 0.5 to 10. The levels of subjectivity vary and diminish throughout certain parts of the grade. So CGC's Matt Nelson has even said on video that once you get more towards the mid to lower grade of comic book grading, it is more like an art form with guidelines. It could even be argued if you were to have AI start grading comic books, it would still have a higher margin of error based off of the sheer amount of surface area that is to be inspected when grading a comic book. Now, is CGC a scam? Is there foul play? Are they denying books in hopes that you're going to resend them in just to make more money? Let's take this disaster of a submission as an example. In the submission, I sent in 31 books to try to hit a 9.8. Out of the 31 books, 9 of them came back. Now, out of the 22 books that they rejected, let's say 9 of them I completely just missed something. You know, it was my bad, my fault. And the other 13, the CGC grader received from higher up, hey, send those back, that way they can send them back in for another attempt. Well, in my personal situation, guess what? They just lost like over $220 because only 3 of those books is worth sending back to CGC. Do you really think a giant company like CGC has the time or is dumb enough to take an economic gamble like that? They're not sending your books back on purpose. Not all grading companies are perfect. I realize this. There's things that they have done in recent history that I do not agree with whatsoever. They're making and grading their own comic book. These are things that the Overshoot Price guy was trying to avoid when they denied starting the first third-party grading company. And I really do hope that CGC realizes how close they're towing that line of ethics that hopefully they never cross. All the crazy harsh 9.8 pre-screen grades that are coming back recently. Number 1, maybe I just need to get a little bit better at grading. Number 2, let's say it is an influx of a bunch of CGC new hires that they're putting into the modern section of comic book grading. Have you ever seen the inner offices of CGC? It's cubicles. They are in a work environment. One grader can lean over to another grader and ask for an opinion. This is how you establish a general consensus. So if it is a lot of new graders, it is very possible that over time, through working through more experienced peers, those new graders will start to form towards the general consensus. And that's the point, because what are we going for? Most accurate. So OG Jerry, either a comic's condition matters to you or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, roll up your book, shove it in your back pocket, and ride off into the sunset like the self-righteous comic collector you all pretend to be. Just don't collectors who value well-kept art. It's okay to do both. Check out the links below for where I share my collection and sell comic books. See you on the next page.